All right, Adam. The Dallas Mavericks basically decided to sit everybody on their roster for the final two games.
Yeah.
They were in a play-in race, like genuinely. Like they could have made the play-in at the time that they decided to do this. The NBA is investigating this. They are looking into the decision to essentially toss these two games and try and keep their draft pick. That's ultimately the key thing. They have a top 10 protected pick that goes to New York if the Mavericks fall outside of the top 10 in this NBA draft. And by losing those two games, they're currently slotted in at 10. If one of New Orleans, Toronto, Orlando, Oklahoma City jumps into the top four, they will lose that pick. Currently, I believe that the chances of that happening are, I can try and do math on this. I mean, I think that it's like not wildly high given the fact that Dallas also would have an opportunity. I think they have something like, what is it? I think they have like a 14% chance or so to jump into the top four themselves. And then they have something like, I don't know. I
think it's around 20
to drop out. Yeah. So it's going to be really interesting to see what happens there. What was your reaction to Dallas deciding to sit their guys?
To me, it feels like the law of unintended consequences from a league standpoint. That if you allow teams to top 10 protect their picks and make a lot of these deals, you're putting them in a position where they've got to weigh the long game versus the short game. And if you are an objective person and you've watched the Dallas Mavericks play basketball over the last, 2 months now, you pretty much know that they don't have much of a chance of winning a postseason series with how cooked their defense has been.
Yep.
And this is, in my view, the right long-term call for the Dallas Mavericks to take because they can get some immediate value out of this in a pivotal summer for them, whether they keep the pick or they end up trading it for something that would help them a little bit more immediately as a veteran. Not saying I recommend that, but saying that that option is at least on the table. And we know right now that, the 2024 draft, when they might kick this pick down to had it transfer, or if it transfers to the Knicks, is not going to be an incredibly strong one. Plus, they're probably going to be better next year and would have a lesser pick in the draft. So I see this as more so about the loophole in the NBA rules that is just the unfortunate reality of the situation. The league can and may want to investigate them and the decision making that went into this as much as they want. It's a shame that Jason Kidd sat in a press conference and really said the quiet part out loud that we all know and we're all thinking. But if we're talking about long-term decision making for an organization, this isn't the first time we've seen it. And I don't think it's the wrong call for them to make.
I think it was the right call. I don't like it.
Yeah.
I don't think it was within the spirit of basketball. Like, I don't think it was in the spirit of competition. And part of me is like, look, this defense is a mess. And we know that the rest of the lineups are a mess and they never figured out front court rotations. And look, we'll talk a lot about Nico Harrison here in a minute and what this Mavs front office has done to this roster. And I think it's worth talking about, but like, part of me is like, you have Luka Doncic and Kyrie Irving, and you're going to be going to play like a Pelicans team that, could or potentially could have been playing a Pelicans team that has also been a mess. You're going to play potentially a Timberwolves team that the end result was, Rudy Gobert punching a teammate and Jaden McDaniels being out, taking off their best option for guarding Luka Doncic in a series. And if you have Luka and Kyrie, part of me is like, we saw this last year. We know what comes of this. Mavericks are an incredibly dangerous team in the playoffs because of Luka. They also have Kyrie. Kyrie is a dangerous playoff player. I do agree with you, though, that I think it's unlikely, given their defensive structure, they could have gotten stops in the playoffs. And ultimately, I do think that this Kyrie trade was seen and completed with the idea of them looking forward toward next year and the years beyond that. I think that they saw an opportunity to get a superstar player to pair next to Luka Doncic that they think will fit next to Luka. And as long as Kyrie stays on the court and does everything he's supposed to do, I am a believer in the Kyrie Luka fit because they are both high level processors, decision makers, shooters, skill players. We had questions about the Chris Paul, James Harden fit until we didn't, right? And those guys are incredible shooters, processors, playmakers with the ball in their hand. I'm a believer in the Kyrie Luka thing being a fit long term. I am. The problem for me is if I was a Dallas fan, and what would ultimately be concerning to me is I don't know how much you can trust Kyrie. Like, let's just be straight up about this. And B, I just don't buy what Nico Harrison has done in terms of building this roster. I came on this show last year when they traded for Christian Wood, and I said I did not think that this was a good move. I said something along the lines of, look, whatever, it's a decent swing to take, but I don't think he's going to play in critical minutes in the playoffs. And I would have rather had the opportunity cost of having that 27th overall pick in hand and try to use it to get somebody else that I think would have been different. I said at the time that I thought Maxi Kleber was going to play over Christian Wood in important minutes. And look, at the end of the day, Jason Kidd never trusted Christian Wood, never trusted him defensively. And that's, in my opinion, Christian Wood was a great offensive player this year. He's probably like in a vacuum worth the 27th overall pick, but trades aren't made in a vacuum when teams have limited assets to spare. And ultimately, I think that Christian Wood was the wrong trade to make for this team because I just didn't buy him defensively. Do I think that trading Dorian Finney-Smith and Spencer Dinwiddie was the wrong trade for Dallas? I would have done everything I could to keep Dorian Finney-Smith, but I kind of do think that that was fine. Genuinely, like I understood why you would do that, thinking that you can get a Dorian Finney-Smith more easily than you can get a Kyrie Irving. Yeah. And I think that that is a reasonable stance to take along with the first round pick. The problem is that you look at Nico Harrison's other moves, it's JaVale McGee to a 3-year deal. The moves you don't make to try and fill in the gaps defensively at the deadline to surround Kyrie and Luka Doncic with guys that can play. Try to find a big. Those guys were not like wildly expensive on the market this trade deadline. Like you look at what Mason Plumlee went for. You look at what other guys that were bigs on the market went for. They were available. I think that Nico Harrison is not the right guy to run this show. And look, we should throw around blame to Mark Cuban a little bit. We know that Mark Cuban is involved in the front office, right? Like we need to be real about that. Mark Cuban is involved in their front office. Here's the thing. Mark Cuban's not going away. Like Mark Cuban is a stagnant for Dallas. He owns the team. So I really do think that they need to strongly consider kind of looking to revamp the front office, looking to revamp the coaching staff. I was not impressed with Jason Kidd this year. I didn't think that he did much of anything creative. I didn't think that the defensive identity that he had last season that led to their run carried over to year 2. And you can look at the roster and say that they made poor moves to do that. I wouldn't disagree necessarily. But I also think that, it might not have been Jason Kidd that was the defensive identity. I think it might have been those dudes in the locker room that were the defensive identity. So if I was a Mavericks fan right now, I wouldn't be pissed about the tanking. I wouldn't be upset that the team decided we can't make a run this year. I'd just be pissed about Nico Harrison and Jason Kidd being the guys making the decisions and making critical roles within this, or critical decisions within this ecosystem at this point.
The one thing that doesn't quite sit right with me right now, and I'm a big Mark Cuban guy. I always have been. I love the passion that he puts into owning a team. I wish we had more owners in sports that were like him in that regard. I don't think that it makes me uncomfortable to watch them pull themselves out of the playoff race to try to make this long-term decision for the pick, while simultaneously trying to criticize all of the behind-the-scenes factors that took Jalen Brunson away from Dallas.
And you know what? Like, I have to be careful with what I say here. I think that Mark Cuban is correct in terms of what he said.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how much of a chance Dallas had to retain Jalen Brunson. I would have paid more. I would have paid more than the Knicks to retain him. If I went on the show at the time when everyone said that was an overpay, and I said I thought it wasn't. So I've been in on the Jalen Brunson deal the Knicks signed from the jump.
Yep.
I think that, Dallas should have just been like, left him a voicemail being like, look, we'll pay you $120 to stay. You know what I mean? Like, look, do whatever you have to get that decision across, but like, or to get that information across, but like, I am not surprised that it ended the way it did with the Knicks.
What Cuban said was right, but the timing and the lack of awareness to complain about being cheated out of something while you're kind of skirting around the rules to keep that 10th overall pick or the chance at that 10th pick just doesn't sit right with me. That's all.
Yep. Yeah. And look, like the real error with Dallas, right? The original sin with Dallas with Jalen Brunson was they should have just signed him to the 455 extension.
The extension. Yeah.
Like Jalen Brunson had already proven himself to be like the perfect foil for Luka Doncic even before the playoff breakout last year. Like I thought they should have signed it to him the offseason before. You know what I thought that Jalen had proven enough to be worth that deal, especially knowing what the TV money is going to look like down the road and with the way the salary cap is going to continue to rise. Like that was a deal that made a lot of sense to me to sign him to 455 even at the time. That is where they originally should have been able to retain Jalen Brunson, in my opinion. And that was the error that was made with Jalen Brunson. I don't think it was in free agency from Dallas's perspective. I think it was prior. Not offering that extension because Jalen was awesome his third season in Dallas. We had enough information on Jalen at that point to know that he was worth that money.
He'd been awesome for a long time. I love Jalen Brunson. I love him.
Yeah, no, I think he's absolutely terrific. Now, here comes the rest of this. Now, if you're Dallas, what do you do moving forward here? Just to give me 1 second. I'll close the loop on tanking. Like, do I think the league should do something to curtail tanking in some way? I mean, look, find Dallas, whatever, do what you have to do. I don't know if you could find Dallas enough based on the current rules in the collective bargaining agreement to where, it's worth it for Mark Cuban not to do this. But I don't think you can really do anything to stop this. And the reason is that basketball is such an individually driven, star-laden sport that the more bites at the apple you have to find that star, find that second star, find that third star that's necessary to win a title, I think that you have to continue taking them. And ultimately, I don't really see any way that tanking will be curtailed. I don't think there's any way the league can really do it, unfortunately, because realistically, like, okay, take draft picks away, I guess. Like that could be the argument. Like, try and take this draft pick away. That feels egregious to me for like a 2-game tank, right? Look at what Portland's done the last 2 years. Yeah. Like, Portland has sat Damian Lillard in the middle of Damian Lillard's best season of his career. What are we going to do? Are we going to strip Portland of their pick? Or are we going to strip X, Y, and Z teams of their pick? I'm not in favor of that. I think that's aggressive and, overly sensitive to what this issue is. So yeah, no, I would just continue down the road of, if teams want to do this, fine, find them, do whatever you have to do. But I also don't think there is a world where we should make lottery odds even flatter than what we have. Like, they're flat enough as it is. You have a 14% chance to win the lottery. if you are the worst team in the league. You have, like a 12% chance if you are the fourth worst team. You have a 10% chance if you're the fifth worst team. You can fall, you have a 50-50 shot basically to fall all the way out of the top four if you are the worst team in the NBA. So I think the way they flatten lottery odds are fine.
Yep.
I just think the league is such a star-driven league that when you don't have it, your best chance is to try and go to the draft. And at the end of the day, I'm just not like an abolish the draft person. Like I'm not. I'm sorry. Like I get the argument for it, but I think in a league where you want to have some degree of parity, you don't want it to become European football, which is basically, I think, what it would become at the end of the day.
Yep, totally agree.
Okay, where do you think Dallas goes this offseason now?
Oh, I don't have a damn clue. I have no idea what I would do if I were in charge of that organization, because so much of it is tied up in decisions related to the cap, right? And I think the first domino with that is probably Christian Wood. You've got to have a really smart game plan and know what your long-term decision is going to be with re-signing him, with how long do you keep him around, what infrastructure can you try to cobble together to make a Kyrie, Luka, Christian Wood team work. And can you afford that infrastructure here this offseason and this summer? Because I think this is the 1 year where Dallas pretty much has no margin for error. We hear some rumblings about Luka. I don't want to speak those into existence or verify any of that. No idea. But they need to do a really good job immediately in this year to make the right decisions and make this a playoff viable roster next season. Hopefully the pick helps them with that, whether they keep it, whether they trade it, depends on how if they're around at 10, who's on the board, can they jump up into the top 4? Completely changes the complexion of what the offseason might look like for them. But at the end of the day, they've got to do something, and they've got to add a lot of versatile 3-and-D type of pieces around the core that they have.
Yeah, and I think they need an answer on the interior as well. I think this is probably a team that you have to play drop coverage with, and I think you have to find that interior presence as a center that can give you that opportunity. The problem is that like Jakob Poeltl is probably the guy like in free agency that makes sense. It's just that like they don't really have a mechanism unless that they try and trade like the 10th overall pick if they get that pick for Jakob Poeltl and like a sign and trade involving Dwight Powell or some shit. Like, I don't know. I'm like just trying to throw shit at the wall on some level. But it might be like JaVale and something else, right? Because you can get to the money in some manner. But yeah, like I think that's what you have to do. You have to try and find an interior presence. You have to find 3-and-D wings that can make sense for you. And you have to kind of go from there. Like you have to have more of an interior defensive presence, I think, in addition to having more mobility on the wings defensively. I think that's the critical piece for Dallas this offseason. They have enough offense. You can makeshift find offense with the dudes you have in the backcourt. You just got to find some front court play. You've got to find those guys that can defend on the wings.
And luckily for them, Sam, those tend to be a little bit cheaper.
They do. They do.